Thomas Kinkade's Christmas Cottage, also simply known as Christmas Cottage, is a 2008 film directed by Michael Campus. This is written by Ken LaZebnik, and it stars Jared Padalecki as Thomas Kinkade. And there are two ways of looking at this. One is a film for people who are aware of Thomas Kinkade's work, and one is a film for people who aren't. Now, I'm of the mind that a good biopic can still be engaging, entertaining, moving, even if you don't know very much about the subject in question. And I don't know very much about Thomas Kinkade. I know basically nothing, or knew basically nothing, before watching this film. So, despite that, if it was a really good biopic, I could still find it engaging. But honestly, I didn't love pretty much most of it. I really didn't like most of it, but then it did manage to turn things around at the 11th hour. I'd say maybe about an hour and 20 minutes in. In fact, I know which scene was the turning point, but I'll discuss with a spoiler warning which scene that was. I can't obviously comment on what it's like as a biopic for people who are aware of Thomas Kinkade's work. I'd be very keen to know if you're a fan of the artist or just familiar with his work. But for me, I knew nothing about him, and I went into this hoping that it would spark an interest in his work. But I have to say, he's really boring as a character, purely in this film. Obviously, not speaking about real life, but in this film, he's really dull. And that's nothing against the performance. I just feel like he's a very boring character. And in fact, the most interesting was a character called Glen, played by Peter O'Toole. I'm not sure who Glen is. I'm not sure if his surname was mentioned in the film, but on IMDb he is credited simply as Glen, or the character is called Glen. But he was really fascinating. And I found him to be really interesting. And whenever he was on screen, I thought, yeah, this could be interesting if he was the main focus. But Kinkade in this film, and I have to stress it is just the character in this film, is very dull. It's not that he was unlikable, but there was nothing about him other than his artistic ability. He's creating this beautiful, beautiful painting of the village or the town and the people in it, and it's absolutely gorgeous. But aside from that, I found the character to be very two dimensional and just didn't really offer anything that I found fascinating. The Christmas cottage aspect is focusing on his family home, the family cottage, and it's possible that they're going to lose this beloved home because they haven't got the money for it. And part of the film is about this and wondering if they'll be able to keep the cottage. And obviously, this is all in the run up to Christmas. The narrative's quite tame, to be honest. Not much happens, and it's not that interesting. Maybe if I had more background knowledge, it might be. But as I said, I feel like a good biopic can draw you in and make you feel whatever kind of emotion they're trying to make you feel, even if you don't know anything about the source material, because it's just like any other film. You don't necessarily have to have background information or specific context to feel the emotions that you're supposed to be feeling. And for, as I said, I think it was about an hour and 20. I didn't time it exactly. But for the most part, I was just not so much bored as just not interested. Nothing interesting was happening apart from Glen and maybe one or two other characters who had minor roles and who were a little bit more well written and interesting, but again, minor characters. There really wasn't anything happening and it was kind of really dull. Maybe if I had more context, it would be fascinating, but I don't believe that that should be necessary for a good biopic. But I would love to know what you think if you know more about Thomas Kinkade's life, if it's an accurate representation, if you enjoyed it more with context. But as I said, it did have a turning point. So if you tried watching it and gave up, I didn't give up, of course, but if that, if you started watching it and realized it was just very flat, very boring, not very emotive, I'd say stick with it again because actually I found it to be very emotional in the last kind of 15, 20 minutes. I'll mention the turning point for me in a moment, but very briefly, it's definitely attempting to be heartwarming, it's attempting to be moving for the most part, apart from the scenes when we're looking at the painting of the people in the area, the beautiful, beautiful painting. Apart from those few scenes, for the most part, it's very flat. It's very kind of boring at times, but kind of just made me feel nothing at other times. And Kinkade as a character is not a very well written character. This is assuming, of course, that he is actually an interesting individual in real life, which I'm assuming he is. Otherwise, why would you focus a film on his life or work or this particular time period in his life? But it did have a turning point at one point. It's got that heartfelt feeling throughout it, or at least it attempted to give it a kind of heartwarming Christmas feel. We do have some beautiful Christmas carols, and they're trying to put on a Christmas nativity, of course. So there are some Christmas things to it that I think were okay. So, spoiler from now, the last thing I'm going to say is simply the turning point in the film. And actually, from this point on, I thought it was good. And the turning point for me is the scene with the nativity when the animals started to melt. It'll make sense in the context of the film if you watch it. And honestly, that seems a little bit weird because the audience was laughing. I thought, okay, is this meant to be funny? But Kinkade was clearly distraught, and as much as I didn't really care for the character at this point, I didn't want to see him being devastated at what was happening. So I'm not sure what I was meant to feel there. But I did find that from that point on, it became quite intense, and the emotions were really raw and realistic, and it really drew me in. And from that point on, it was actually very, very well done. I think it's about the last 20 minutes, and it just felt like a different film. So it managed to redeem itself right at the end, so it's not all bad. But honestly, I didn't care for it. As I said, maybe it would be different if I knew more about Thomas Kinkade, but I don't believe a good biopic relies on external knowledge. I've seen numerous biopics where I knew next to nothing about the subject matter, but was still able to really thoroughly enjoy it. Unfortunately, Thomas Kinkade's Christmas Cottage, for me, is not one of those films.